Well, good evening to everybody. Thanks for giving up your time to chat about toxicology tonight. Just briefly by way of introduction about me, I spent 10 years in a mixture of first and second opinion practice before I came back to my first love really in veterinary medicine, which was pathology, and I did an intercalated degree at Edinburgh, and then went on and did my internship at the University of Sydney, got my DVCS there. Then, after those 10 years, I joined what was originally Grange Laboratories, and that was then sold to IDEX, and I stayed on as their head of clinical pathology for, I think, 7 years. And from there, I left in 2004 to start CTDS. So that's my kind of background. I've been a full-time clinical pathologist for more than 20 years, and it's where I feel most comfortable in the profession. So CTDS is Carmichael Torrance Diagnostic Services, or nobody ever calls it that, and we're based here in Leeds. I hope you can see my little spot there. And we are one of 5 independently owned veterinary diagnostic labs in the UK. We own them, we lead them, we all work collaboratively together. And I think the difference about working with our kind of group is we really value that interaction between the pathologist and the clinician. We think that's absolutely central to what we're doing. If we understand how you work, that's really helpful to us. If you understand how we work, that's really helpful. There has to be a professional relationship that goes each way, and that's at the core of what we do. But the other nice thing that we can do is, because we're not owned by the money men, is that we can actually innovate and we can bring new things to the laboratory business. And over the course of this 10 years while we've been trading in CTDS, we've brought a new exotic service. We've introduced kind of molecular testing on a routine basis for infectious disease and for core analysis, so we can tell you whether you have a T or a B cell lymphoma just off the cytology slides. And now we've started into diagnostic toxicology. And this has been going for about 2 years for us. And this is very much an introductory webinar, just to kind of give you a feel for what's happening in the UK in relation to poisoning, the kind of resources that you need in the practice to deal with these cases, some practical ideas about handling the cases, and then going on to talk about toxicology and how do we try and identify what the poison is and why do we bother, given the fact that very often these cases have to be treated instantaneously when they present to the practice. I want to talk about the samples to take, and then I'm going to show you a couple of cases just to kind of illustrate what we can come out of it. And then I wanted just to briefly mention what happens in the case of unexpected deaths, and there's a couple of things that we can help you with there. Then I'm happy to take some questions, and hopefully we'll be all done and dusted and ready for cocoa before too terribly long. So, veterinary poisoning in the UK. A lot of the information I'm going to show you now comes from the Veterinary Poisons Information Service, VPIS, and their estimate is that there are 40,000 cases of poisoning of veterinary animals, and predominantly small animal species, in the UK each year. It's a staggering case volume, I think. And of these, about 3% of these cases are, on the basis of the VPS numbers, fatal, so that's 1,200 animals a year that are being killed by poisoning. And broadly, we break these down into accidental poisoning. This would be an example of a dog that breaks into a chocolate bar and eats that. Unintentional poisoning, I guess, is when people decide that the cat's looking a bit peaky and give them paracetamol. Malicious poisoning, where there's a neighbour who's putting out rat bait specifically to try and poison a neighbour's animal. And we're also going to start off really talking about these inconsequential poisonings, or not really poisonings, but situations where people are very alarmed that poisoning has kind of occurred. So I thought it would be useful to start with just an idea about some of the substances that people probably ring up about and say, my dog's just eaten this, and as you know, it's usually dogs who are doing the inappropriate eating. And these are the kind of products that people will ring up and say, my dog's eaten this, is it a problem? And the good news is that beyond the sort of physical effects of these things, either in the mouth or in the stomach, or on the surface of the skin, these products are not generally considered toxic. And I thought this raises a kind of first point for us really, which is how are we going to get that information over to our reception staff, because they're going to be the people who are actually picking up these calls. And it immediately flags up the issue that poisoning is about information management and having that information to hand. So it's just a brief list. If any of this is of interest to you, we'll be posting all of the slides here on the CTDS website in 2 or 3 days' time, so no need to try and take any notes of this stuff. So the VPIS keep a kind of cumulative log of their cases. They are really informatics people, and they're very good at keeping a tab of these things. And they have a cumulative total of what are the case inquiries that they actually receive. And as we talked about already, Chocolate kind of heads that list in relation to the number of queries that they get. You'll see that the non-steroidals are quite an important group, also represented here, of the common inquiries that they actually receive. And the third group would be the vitamin K rodenticide antagonists. So we have different forms that are currently available in the UK market. And the fourth group I would kind of pick out would be the plants, the lilies and the grapes and those kind of compounds. And I guess we'd also select out the permethrins, which are probably the number one, well, they are the number one cause of intoxication of cats in the UK, usually as a result of inappropriate application of canine products to cats. So this is the kind of list of this is what they get inquiries about. So these are all potentially problem agents, they can cause problems. And you can see that within this we also have quite a significant group where we have no idea what the agent is. We just know that the animal is showing signs and it's compatible with intoxication. And we'll talk about how we approach that from a testing point of view a bit later on. So within that group of poisonings, how many animals actually die? Well, the reported instance in relation to VPIS is about 3% of cases. I was looking at the paper from Italy from a comparative kind of unit, and they're talking about a fatality rate of about 8%. So I think the 3.2 is relatively low, and of course that's only of the cases that are actually reported to the VPIS that a known outcome is given for. But you can see now that, again, our biggest group is these agents unknown, where we don't know what it is, but it's actually resulted in the death of the animal. And a lot of these, as this is historic data, have never been tested for what that agent actually was. It was clear it was intoxicating, it wasn't known what it was. And then within that, we also see the metaldehyde and the permethrins that we've mentioned, specifically in relation to cat, are all big problems. But almost everything else that we're seeing there represented is here, including the non-steroidal anti-inflammatories as well. And also this product, which is actually a vitamin D amyl, which is actually used, or was used, as a rodenticide also. It's now actually being withdrawn. So if we're thinking about how in the practice are we going to tackle toxicology cases or suspected toxicology cases, there are some things that start to become fairly clear as to what we actually need. We need some information resources, so we have the information like what's toxic, what's not, what's a common intoxicant, what's less common. And immediately within the practice too, we're going to have to think about how do we filter that information through to the people who may well be at the front of house and having to actually deal with the public as those inquiries kind of come in. The other thing that's very clear about toxicology is that this is not something where you're going to retain this information in your head. You're going to need support to manage these cases, and we're going to talk about where that comes from as we kind of go through, and specifically in relation to VPIS. You're also going to need access to specific drugs, which you're going to use almost exclusively for treating intoxications, and then you have decisions to make about do you keep them in the practice so they can go out of date and never get used. Are you going to access the ToxBox system that's available through Vets Now? We'll talk a little bit about that. And certainly some of the antidotes that they have, you may well feel that you're not going to keep them in the practice, but you need to have easy access. And then the new thing I want to talk about is really diagnostic testing for intoxication. So I tend to think of these as the big three things that you actually need for managing these cases. And the first thing that you need, obviously, is the Veterinary Poisons Information Service. Now, if you don't think you have a subscription to this, because this is a subscription-based telephone service, there's their number there. Then if your practice is registered, if it's an approved practice from the Royal College, then one of the requirements of that is that the practice does in fact have a subscription to VPIS. They see it as absolutely central to being able to manage these kind of cases, and we'll talk a bit more about what they can do for you shortly. The second thing that you'll need to have access to, as I say, is specific antidotes. And we can have a wee look at what's in the ToxBox. And the ToxBox was actually developed in collaboration with the VPIS. They kind of looked at their information